I've literally been following this since just before the pandemic, so 3.5 years, and the verdict came in today. Maybe I shouldn't say the verdict yet. No. But okay, so if you want to understand a little bit about this trial and what happened, essentially we have three characters and three murders in the state of Idaho. There's a fourth murder and another attempted murder, but they happened in Arizona, so they're not part of this conversation, or they were not part of this trial. Okay, so here are the players, and I'll put up a picture somewhere so you can see Lori and Chad. So Lori and Chad are these Midwestern, they grew up separately, very, very religious, Mormon upbringing, the whole routine. Although Lori's family and her upbringing was a little unorthodox as far as LDS goes, but Chad's was very traditional. He was the oldest in his family. He was a little bit of the black sheep. Like all of his brothers went on to get graduate degrees and, just made lives for themselves. Meanwhile, he was digging graves. That was essentially his main job. But then he started publishing books. He had this kind of idea in his head that because he had had a near-death experience that allowed him to see what he called beyond the veil. And I've heard of other people doing that, like you have a near-death experience and then you have this kind of like insight into the afterlife and so forth. So that's kind of where he was at. So he started writing these books and publishing other people's books about near-death experiences. Okay, nothing terribly weird about that, but all of that started to get folded into this idea of the second coming, the end of days, the resurrection, the time when the 144,000 would make their way up into the heavenly kingdom. So there's a lot of like religious overtones to all of this. But how did the murders happen, you might ask? The prosecution today described it as a combination of desire for money, power, and sex. Yes, Mormon sex. No, so it's just that the murders were particularly horrible and egregious because they involved the death of two children. This woman, Lori's children. One was a biological child from a previous marriage, and the other child was the biological nephew of her husband. It's a little bit confusing, but she and her husband adopted a special needs little boy who was in their family but couldn't be taken care of by his biological parents. And by all accounts, Lori was a loving and attentive mother until she killed the kids. So all the problems happened when Lori met Chad, which happened in 2018. And they got really into their kind of like dueling scriptures kind of bantering, and this very, very strong idea that the end of days were coming. This was happening. And there were these subgroups out in Utah and Idaho and this whole area of a lot of Mormon country where people were prepping. One of them was called Preparing a People. And the idea was that you would take all of your money, all of your savings, buy tents, buy tons of food and water, supplies, and I don't know if guns were included, but it was a lot of preparation. And that was going to, you're going to take all of that stuff, I guess, or that's what you were going to need when the end days came. So one of the things that they believed was that Utah, Salt Lake City, was going to be struck by a horrible earthquake, I believe. And so people were moving to Rexburg, Idaho, which also is very, very LDS, 95% LDS population. Brigham Young, which, as you may know, is the Mormon university, they have a campus in Idaho. So it was just kind of like a perfect segue. So Chad, the gravedigger, the outcast of his family, was publishing these books. Lori was reading those books and getting infatuated with him like he was some kind of like rock star. This was not like a traditionally handsome dude. Just, many people have said that. When you see pictures of him, you can sort of understand that. Well, you can't understand the sort of physical attraction, but if you have an open mind, you could say to yourself, wow, she was really falling for this person's spirit or his message or his intellect or possibly even his kind of like guru a whole vibe of like, join me, you are the chosen people, you are special, you are a resurrected being, we were married in previous lives, you are a translated being, and you are meant to lead the 144,000 into the kingdom of heaven. You know who was big also on the 144,000? Charles Manson. Perhaps you remember him. So the two of them got together, and then they conspired basically to wipe out everybody else in their lives that was in their way. So, okay, on one hand, you could say logically, all right, this guy, this woman, they want to be together. They're both married. So get a divorce. I mean, that would have been the logical thing, but no. I think in a lot of cases with LDS, it's like, people get divorced if they're Mormon, but for whatever reason, that wasn't going to work. And if you want to look under the surface of whatever that reason was, it was money. So if the two of them got divorced from their partners, they had nothing really between them. He wasn't making any money as a book publisher. That was really not very lucrative. And the grave digging, well, I don't know what that paid exactly, but I don't think he was doing that at that time. She had worked as a hairdresser, but mostly her income came from her wealthy husband. I mean, he was financially very comfortable. They had nice houses. They went on vacations to Hawaii frequently. Again, they had this child, Tylee. They didn't have her together. She came from a previous marriage for which that husband was dead, and they had this adopted child, JJ. So anyway, so Chad and Lori get together and systematically wipe everybody out in an effort to be together and to be happy. The first person they wipe out is Lori's husband. So that was Charles. And they killed him. Chad was nowhere to be found at that time, so he didn't do it. It was Lori's brother, Alex, who basically did her bidding. So he shot Charles, but when they presented it to the police, they said it was in self-defense. Charles hit him with the baseball bat, and what else was there to do? He was, getting a little crazy, and there were kids in the house, so he shot him. Charges were never brought at that time. Nobody thought anything of it, which was weird because Charles had a $1 million life insurance policy, and Lori was convinced it was going to go to her. Charles was so suspicious of Lori and her weird behavior, calling herself a translated being who didn't need to eat anymore and was like existing on some like other plane. And she had said to him, I can kill you. I can kill you either with my mind or I can have you killed. So he was worried, and he switched his beneficiary on his life insurance policy. So when in fact they did murder him, Lori was livid to find that Charles had taken her off and given all of the money to his sister. And from his, okay, so that's all you need to know. And the sister was the grandmother of that little boy, JJ, who, by the way, is special needs. I don't think I mentioned that. So, so they got rid of Charles. Then months later, Lori she gets the kids, and they move to Rexburg, Idaho, which must have been very dismal compared to Arizona where they were living. It was certainly colder, and it was just, a new territory. Tylee purportedly did not want to go. She was sad to leave her friends and her high school. That makes sense. Actually, I don't know that she was in high school at that time. I know she received her GED, but whatever. She certainly had a community and friends where she lived. So they moved to Idaho, and very shortly after that, Tylee disappears. Nobody knows she's gone. Nobody's asking about her. If people are texting her, which did happen a little bit, sometimes Lori would answer back. She disappears, and then a couple of weeks after her, JJ disappears. Now, at the time, you have to remember, no one's asking questions because they're new to the environment. And anyone that they know who's like, oh, where's Tylee? It was very easy for Lori to say, oh, she moved on campus at BYU. She's visiting friends, whatever. Where's JJ? Oh, he went back to his grandmother. So she would just make stuff up. So that's murder 1, murder 2. And then the third murder came just shortly after that. Like in October, Chad had to get rid of his wife. So her name was Tammy. She was 49 years old when she was murdered. She was the mother of 5 children, who were all like adults at that time. I believe she was even a grandmother. And here's the crazy part. Everybody believed that she just died of natural causes. She just died in her sleep. That's what Chad told everybody, and everyone believed him, and no one thought to do an autopsy. So they put her in the ground, and that was that. Until a couple of weeks later, it's too complicated to tell that part of the story. There was an attempted shooting, and someone began to connect the dots. So Tammy's body was exhumed. And at that same time that all that was happening, people were starting to notice that JJ was missing. People noticed that Tylee was missing, but nobody was really pursuing it. But JJ, remember, still had grandparents. So the grandparents put in for a wellness check, and that got the ball rolling. You can imagine the cops show up, they're like, oh, it's a great story about how the cops knew where she was. Lori didn't tell anyone where she was moving. Definitely not the woman Kay, who in her mind stole the life insurance that she was supposed to get. So this is crazy. Kay tells a story that one night she was like woken up in the middle of the night, and she was like, I have to check Charles's email. Okay, so remember, Charles is her brother. He was married to Lori. Kay did some bookkeeping work for Charles, so she knew his passwords, she knew his accounts and so forth. So she went into his email and she's looking through it, and she sees, how like when Amazon sends you something, it says your package is on the way, your package has arrived, all the updates. So she sees this and she's like, what package? She's getting packages from beyond. So she looks into it and she sees that it's two malachite wedding bands, and they're sent to Lori, and they're sent to an address in Rexburg, Idaho, that she's never seen before. She calls the police. She says, I want a wellness check on my grandson. I haven't seen him in months. His mother is shirking my calls. She won't respond back to me. And now I see she's ordering stuff on my dead brother's account. So that's all the police needed to hear. They show up at Lori's, and they don't have body cam footage, but they have body cam audio only, or at least that's what was released to the public. And you can hear Lori saying like, oh yeah, no, I don't have JJ right now. He's with my friend in Arizona. Like, she says it very convincingly. And then she's like joking around with the cops, and she's like, yeah, Kay is really the troublemaker here, and she starts to paint this picture that the grandmother is really like the Looney Tunes one, and the cops just buy it. But they do need to see the kid in order to safely say to the woman who asked for the welfare check, yeah, he's fine. So they ask her to kind of show where he is or send a picture or whatever, and she doesn't. And then the next day or 2 days later, they come back to check in with her again, and she's moved out completely from the condo. She's just gone. So what happened at that point was she and Chad left for Hawaii. So that's like what started the ball rolling. So you have to understand there was a period of time where no one knew where the children were. Lori was arrested, and basically it was like, show us the children and you can go home. She wouldn't. Oh, and another thing to take into account is that each child was receiving a little over $2,000, let's call it like 2,500 roughly, from Social Security benefits, because JJ's biological father was dead, his adopted father was dead, and Tylee's biological father was dead. So they both, as you know, being under 18. So Lori was pocketing all that money. She had made arrangements for the money to go into her account, or she had opened up like a fake, I don't know what she did, but she was collecting that money. So she didn't get the life insurance from her husband, but she did get these Social Security benefits. So she did have money to play around with. And then Chad, of course, his wife dies, you know, mysteriously in the middle of the night, and he has and he had upped her life insurance policy, so he pulled in a little over $400,000. So I mean, you know, so that's kind of how the story goes, but it's so much more complicated than that, because Chad had this whole like rubric of light and dark, and that if you were possessed by a dark spirit, which is what Lori believed, all these people who are dead, they all believed conveniently that they were possessed by dark spirits, and that they really needed to die to be released of that spirit. So there was this weird kind of religious justification for what they were doing, but really what they were doing was killing anyone who was in their path of being together, and collecting as much money as they could. And there, if you really want to be entertained, Chad, who fancied himself a writer but was only self-published, wrote a very kind of like soft-core kind of story about him and Lori, but of course he changed their names, and they were all kind of like, you know, mythical creatures, and it's quite nauseating to read, but entertaining at the same time. So anyway, the trial had been going on for several weeks over the course of April into May, and there was a lot of attention on it, and everybody was quite nervous that they wouldn't convict Lori, because there really is no smoking gun. Like, she may have not ever gotten her hands dirty, but the conspiracy is there, the plan, the intent to murder these people that were in their lives and were in their way. And I'm going to stop there. Thanks.